What if I told you that the reason you keep attracting narcissists into your life isn't bad luck or coincidence, but a psychological pattern that Carl Jung discovered, and the truth behind it is so uncomfortable that most people would rather stay trapped in toxic relationships than face it? Before we dive into this life-changing revelation that could finally break the cycle of toxic relationships in your life, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Because what you're about to learn will challenge everything you thought you knew about why certain people keep showing up in your life. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, and what he discovered about relationship patterns was both revolutionary and deeply disturbing. He found that we don't attract people randomly. We attract people who mirror our unconscious psychological patterns, our unhealed wounds, and most importantly, the parts of ourselves we've rejected or never fully developed. And when it comes to narcissists, Jung's insights reveal a truth that most people desperately want to avoid. You're not a victim of circumstance, you're an unconscious participant in a psychological dance. Now, before you get defensive or click away, understand that this isn't about blaming yourself for being abused or manipulated. This is about empowerment. This is about understanding the hidden psychological forces that create these patterns so you can finally break free from them. Because here's what Jung discovered. Until you become conscious of what's happening in your unconscious mind, you'll keep repeating the same patterns over and over again. The first thing Jung would tell you about attracting narcissists is this: you're probably suffering from what he called a wounded inner child complex. This complex was formed early in your life, likely through experiences with caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, critical, or inconsistent in their love and attention. Maybe you had a narcissistic parent yourself, or perhaps you grew up in an environment where love was conditional on your performance or behavior. This wounded inner child complex creates a psychological blueprint that says love equals struggle, attention equals drama, and relationships require you to constantly prove your worth. The narcissist, with their initial love bombing and intermittent reinforcement, perfectly matches this unconscious blueprint. They provide the familiar pattern of intense attention followed by withdrawal, validation followed by criticism, that your psyche recognizes as love. Jung discovered that we're unconsciously drawn to people who recreate our earliest relationship dynamics, even when those dynamics were harmful. Your unconscious mind isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to heal the original wound by recreating the scenario and hoping for a different outcome. But here's the tragic part. Narcissists can't provide the healing you need because they're operating from their own wounded patterns. The second psychological pattern Jung identified is called projection. This is where you unconsciously project qualities onto the narcissist that they don't actually possess. In the beginning stages of the relationship, you might see them as confident when they're actually grandiose, as charming when they're actually manipulative, as special when they're actually entitled. But here's the deeper layer Jung would want you to understand. You're not just projecting positive qualities onto them, you're also projecting your own disowned power. If you grew up learning to suppress your own needs, to be overly accommodating, to avoid conflict at all costs, then you've likely disowned your own healthy narcissism, your own ability to prioritize yourself and set boundaries. The narcissist becomes a container for all the self-advocacy, confidence, and self-focus that you've rejected in yourself. On an unconscious level, you're attracted to them because they embody qualities you wish you had, but have been taught are wrong or selfish. This is why the relationship often feels so intense and compelling in the beginning. You're literally falling in love with disowned parts of yourself. Jung called this phenomenon the anima and animus projection. You're projecting your undeveloped opposite qualities onto the other person. If you're overly giving, you'll be attracted to someone who's overly taking. If you're overly accommodating, you'll be drawn to someone who's overly demanding. If you're overly empathetic, you'll be fascinated by someone who seems to lack empathy entirely. The third pattern Jung identified is what he called the savior complex. This is particularly common among people who attract narcissists repeatedly. You unconsciously believe that your love, understanding, and sacrifice can heal or change the other person. This complex often develops in childhood when you learned to manage a difficult parent's emotions or when you were praised for being the good, helpful, understanding child. The savior complex makes you unconsciously attracted to people who seem broken or damaged because it gives you a sense of purpose and identity. You feel needed, important, special because you're the one who can see through their difficult behavior to their wounded inner child. You tell yourself that underneath their cruel or selfish behavior, they're really just hurt and misunderstood. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The savior complex isn't really about helping others. It's about avoiding your own pain and development. When you're focused on fixing someone else, you don't have to face your own wounds, your own growth, your own responsibility for your life. The narcissist provides the perfect distraction from your own inner work. Jung also discovered that people who repeatedly attract narcissists often suffer from what he called a weak ego structure. This doesn't mean you're weak as a person. It means that your sense of self is not well defined or stable. You might struggle with knowing what you want, what you believe, or what your boundaries are. You might change your opinions or preferences based on who you're with, or you might have difficulty saying no, even when something doesn't feel right. This weak ego structure develops when you didn't receive consistent, unconditional love and validation during your formative years. Instead of developing a strong sense of self, you learned to adapt and shapeshift to get the love and attention you needed. You became skilled at reading other people's needs and emotions, but lost touch with your own. Narcissists are unconsciously drawn to people with weak ego structures because they need someone who will adapt to their reality, who won't challenge their grandiose self-image, who will provide the constant validation they crave. And you're unconsciously drawn to their apparent confidence and strong opinions because it feels like the stability and certainty you lack within yourself. The fourth pattern Jung identified is called repetition compulsion. This is the unconscious drive to repeat familiar patterns, even when they're harmful, because familiarity feels like safety to the unconscious mind. If chaos, drama, and emotional intensity were normal in your childhood, then calm, stable relationships might actually feel boring or wrong to your unconscious mind. Narcissists provide the emotional intensity and unpredictability that your nervous system has learned to associate with love and connection. The highs and lows, the constant uncertainty about where you stand, the need to constantly prove yourself, all of this feels familiar and therefore safe to your unconscious mind, even though it's destroying your well-being. Jung understood that breaking this pattern requires becoming conscious of it first. You have to recognize that what feels like love might actually be trauma bonding, that what feels like passion might actually be anxiety, that what feels like being needed might actually be being used. The fifth psychological pattern is what Jung called the shadow projection. Your shadow contains all the qualities you've rejected or denied in yourself. If you've been taught that anger is bad, that selfishness is wrong, that putting yourself first is selfish, then these qualities become part of your shadow. And here's the fascinating part. You'll often be unconsciously attracted to people who embody your shadow qualities. The narcissist's selfishness, their anger, their ability to put themselves first without guilt. These might be shadow qualities that you've rejected in yourself. On an unconscious level, you're drawn to them because they're living out parts of yourself that you've disowned. But because these are shadow projections, you'll also feel conflicted about these qualities, attracted and repelled at the same time. This creates a complex dynamic where you're simultaneously fascinated by their behavior and critical of it, drawn to their confidence and hurt by their selfishness. You might find yourself making excuses for behavior that you would never tolerate from anyone else, because on an unconscious level, you're defending disowned parts of yourself. Jung believed that the goal of psychological development is to integrate your shadow, to reclaim the disowned parts of yourself in a healthy way. This means learning to be appropriately selfish, to express anger constructively, to prioritize your own needs without guilt. When you integrate these shadow qualities, you'll no longer need to project them onto others, and you'll no longer be unconsciously attracted to people who embody them in destructive ways. The sixth pattern Jung identified is perhaps the most painful to acknowledge, the unconscious belief that you don't deserve healthy love. This core belief often develops in childhood when you experience conditional love, emotional neglect, or outright abuse. You learn that love comes with a price, that you have to earn affection through performance, sacrifice, or by being useful to others. This unconscious belief creates what Jung called a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't believe you deserve consistent, respectful, unconditional love, you'll unconsciously sabotage healthy relationships or dismiss healthy partners as boring or not exciting enough. The narcissist's treatment of you, their hot and cold behavior, their criticism disguised as help, all of this confirms your unconscious belief about your worth. Jung understood that this isn't a conscious process. You're not deliberately choosing unhealthy relationships. Your unconscious mind is simply gravitating toward what feels familiar and matches your internal beliefs about yourself and love. The narcissist's intermittent reinforcement, their periods of withholding, followed by love bombing, creates an addictive cycle that feels like the love you learned to expect. But here's what Jung would want you to understand. This pattern can be changed, but only through conscious awareness and deliberate inner work. You have to become aware of your unconscious beliefs about love and worthiness, and you have to actively challenge and change them. The seventh pattern involves what Jung called the anima or animus possession. For women, the animus represents the inner masculine, and when it's undeveloped or projected, it can lead to attraction to men who embody negative masculine qualities like dominance, aggression, or emotional unavailability. For men, the anima represents the inner feminine, and when it's projected, it can lead to attraction to women who embody negative feminine qualities like manipulation, emotional volatility, or victimhood. When your inner opposite is undeveloped, you'll tend to attract people who embody the shadow aspects of that energy. Instead of developing your own inner strength, assertiveness, and ability to set boundaries, you might be attracted to someone who seems strong but is actually controlling. Instead of developing your own emotional intelligence and intuition, you might be drawn to someone who seems emotionally expressive but is actually manipulative. Jung believed that healthy relationships require both partners to have developed their inner opposite to some degree. You need to have access to both your masculine and feminine qualities, your strength and your sensitivity, your logic and your intuition. When these qualities are undeveloped within you, you'll seek them outside yourself, often in unhealthy forms. The eighth pattern Jung identified is the victim-rescuer-persecutor triangle, which he saw as a common unconscious dynamic in dysfunctional relationships. In this triangle, people unconsciously rotate between three roles: the victim who feels powerless and seeks rescue, the rescuer who feels responsible for fixing others, and the persecutor who blames and criticizes. People who attract narcissists often start in the rescuer role, believing they can save or heal the narcissist. But the narcissist typically operates from the victim role initially, presenting themselves as misunderstood or wounded, which triggers your rescuer complex. Eventually, the narcissist moves into the persecutor role, blaming and criticizing you, while you move into the victim role. This triangle is unconsciously addictive because it provides a sense of drama and intensity that can feel like passion or deep connection. It also allows all parties to avoid taking full responsibility for their own lives and healing. The rescuer gets to feel needed and superior, the victim gets to avoid responsibility, and the persecutor gets to feel powerful and right. Jung understood that breaking free from this triangle requires recognizing your unconscious investment in these roles and choosing to step out of the drama entirely. This means giving up the identity of being the helper, the fixer, or the one who understands difficult people better than anyone else. The ninth pattern involves what Jung called the collective unconscious and archetypal patterns. Throughout human history, certain relationship dynamics have repeated across cultures and generations. The wounded healer who attracts broken people, the innocent who attracts predators, the orphan who attracts false parents, these are archetypal patterns that exist in the collective unconscious. When you're unconsciously identified with one of these archetypal patterns, you'll tend to attract people who fit the corresponding archetypal role. If you're unconsciously playing the wounded healer archetype, you'll attract people who need healing but aren't willing to do the work themselves. If you're unconsciously playing the innocent archetype, you'll attract people who want to exploit or corrupt that innocence. Jung believed that becoming conscious of these archetypal patterns is essential for breaking free from them. You have to recognize which archetypal role you've been unconsciously playing and make a conscious choice to step into a more empowered archetypal pattern. The 10th and most important pattern Jung identified is the lack of individuation. Individuation is Jung's term for the process of becoming who you really are, separate from family conditioning, cultural expectations, and unconscious patterns. Most people never complete this process, which means they remain unconsciously driven by childhood wounds, family dynamics, and collective programming. When you haven't individuated, you don't have a strong sense of your own identity, values, and boundaries. You're more likely to lose yourself in relationships, to adapt to others rather than being authentic, to seek validation from external sources rather than developing internal self-worth. This makes you an ideal target for narcissists who need partners who will adapt to their reality and provide constant validation. Jung understood that individuation is not a selfish process, it's actually essential for healthy relationships. When you know who you are, what you value, and what your boundaries are, you're less likely to be manipulated or to lose yourself in unhealthy dynamics. You're also more likely to attract partners who are also individuated and capable of healthy mutual relationships. The process of individuation requires facing your shadow, integrating your projections, healing your complexes, and developing a relationship with your unconscious mind. It means taking responsibility for your own healing, rather than expecting others to heal you or trying to heal others instead of yourself. But here's the empowering truth Jung discovered. Once you become conscious of these patterns, you can change them. The unconscious only has power over you when it remains unconscious. When you bring these patterns into conscious awareness, you gain the power to choose differently. Breaking the pattern of attracting narcissists requires several conscious steps. First, you must develop a relationship with your own unconscious through practices like dream work, active imagination, or therapy. You need to understand your own psychological patterns and where they came from. Second, you must reclaim your projections. Instead of looking for confidence, strength, or self-advocacy in others, you must develop these qualities within yourself. Instead of trying to heal others, you must focus on your own healing and development. Third, you must integrate your shadow. You must learn to express anger appropriately, to be healthily selfish, to set boundaries without guilt. When you integrate these qualities consciously, you won't need to seek them unconsciously in others. Fourth, you must heal your attachment wounds and develop secure attachment within yourself. This means learning to self-soothe, to validate yourself, to meet your own emotional needs rather than depending on others to do so. Finally, you must commit to the process of individuation, becoming who you really are rather than who you think you should be or who others want you to be. This is lifelong work, but it's the only path to truly healthy, conscious relationships. Jung's message is ultimately one of hope and empowerment. Yes, you've been unconsciously participating in these patterns, but that also means you have the power to change them. You're not doomed to repeat these cycles forever. With consciousness, commitment, and inner work, You can break free from the pattern of attracting narcissists and create the healthy, loving relationships you truly deserve. Remember, the goal isn't to become perfect or to never make mistakes in relationships again. The goal is to become conscious, to understand your own psychological patterns, and to make choices from awareness rather than from unconscious compulsion. If this video has helped you understand why you've been attracting narcissists and what you can do about it, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Share in the comments which of these patterns resonated most with you, and remember that recognizing these patterns is the first step toward changing them. The journey of conscious relationship and individuation is challenging but incredibly rewarding, and you have everything within you to create the love and life you truly deserve.